The air at 12,000 feet was thin and sharp, a blade of ice in the lungs. It smelled of pine, cold rock, and the metallic tang of spent brass that clung to the gravel of the qualification range. Sergeant Anya Sharma stood apart from the nervous energy of Vulture Company, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow. Her field cap was pulled low, casting her face in soft darkness. But her eyes, the color of slate under a winter sky, missed nothing. She watched the line of shooters, their bodies tense under the weight of their gear and the heavier weight of their commander's expectations. Captain Eva Rostova strode behind the firing line like a caged predator. She was sharp angles and loud confidence, her voice a drill bit boring into the mountain silence. Focus, people. I want perfect scores. Not good scores. Perfect. The colonel is watching our metrics. Do not embarrass me. Beside Rostova, a young Lieutenant Miller puffed out his chest, a mirror of his commander's brittle arrogance. He spotted Sharma standing near the ammunition point, her rifle case leaning against a stack of sandbags. He sauntered over, his boots crunching with self-importance. "You the attachment?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "Logistics, right? Here to count brass." He gestured vaguely at her case. "Make sure that stays out of the way. This is a live-fire range, not a supply depot." Sharma's gaze remained on the firing line. She watched a young private flinch before pulling the trigger, his breathing ragged, his shot predictably wide. "I'm here for observation," she said, her voice quiet and even, carrying no hint of reaction to his condescension. "Observe from back there," Miller said, pointing to a lean-to 100 yards behind them. "First sergeant can use a hand with the water cans." He smirked and walked away, convinced he had put the quiet NCO in her place. From the other side of the range, Master Sergeant Elias Vance watched the exchange. His face, a roadmap of 2 decades in the infantry, was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on Sharma. He'd seen the transfer orders. They were vague, technical evaluation and support, but the originating command was one he recognized. It wasn't logistics. He saw how she stood, perfectly balanced and still, her head barely moving as she scanned the wind flags, the distant targets, the mirage shimmering off the rifle barrels. She wasn't counting brass. She was calculating. The day wore on, a slow grind of shouted commands and the percussive crack-thump of rifles. The wind, a fickle and treacherous beast in these mountains, began to pick up. It snaked through the valley, pushing shots low and left. Scores began to drop. Rostova's mood soured, her voice growing sharper, more personal. "Peterson, are you even trying? My grandmother could shoot better than that," she yelled, her voice amplified by the range's speaker system. The private, Peterson, flinched again, his next shot even worse. Sharma watched the windsock nearest the target line. It was hanging limp. The one halfway down the range was twitching east. The one at the firing line was gusting west. 3 different winds in 1,000 meters. The shooters were being taught to read the flag nearest them, a fatal flaw in this environment. They weren't compensating for the wind's journey, only its origin. A basic error, an instructor's error. She filed the observation away, her expression unchanging. Vance walked over, his stride measured. He stopped beside her, not looking at her directly, but at the bruised purple clouds gathering over the highest peak. "Storms coming in faster than they said." "Yes, First Sergeant," Sharma replied. "The pressure's dropping. I can feel it in the air density. It'll affect the bullet trajectory." Vance finally turned to look at her. He saw the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the utter lack of pretense. "Captain won't call it. She wants that perfect score sheet for the colonel's brief." "Metrics are not the same as combat readiness," Sharma said softly. It wasn't a criticism, just a statement of fact. Their conversation was cut short by a roar from Rostova. Private Peterson had failed to qualify, his final score a full 10 points below the minimum. He stood with his head down, his rifle held loosely in his hands. Rostova stormed over to him. "Unacceptable. This is a reflection of my leadership. Your failure is my failure." She wasn't taking responsibility. She was placing blame. In her fury, she turned and gestured wildly at the range. We need discipline. We need focus. We don't need distractions. Her eyes landed on Sharma, a convenient target for her frustration. She marched towards her, with Miller trailing in her wake. You! Rostova barked, pointing at Sharma. Still standing around? I thought you were told to make yourself useful. Before Sharma could respond, Miller, eager to please, took a step forward. I'll handle it, ma'am. He grabbed Sharma's rifle case, a heavy-duty Pelican model, intending to haul it out of the way. He misjudged its weight and balance. The case slipped from his grip, tumbling end over end before crashing onto a jagged outcrop of granite with a sickening crunch of plastic and metal. A dead silence fell over the range. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Miller stared at the damaged case, his face paling. Rostova waved a dismissive hand. It's a rifle, Lieutenant, not a Faberge egg. Get it to the armorer. She turned her glare on Sharma. Well, Sergeant, it looks like your day of observation is over. You're useless to me without a weapon. Go check in with the motor pool. See if they need help changing tires. Sharma knelt. Her movements were fluid, deliberate. She unlatched the case. The foam inside was custom cut, cradling a highly modified M110A1 rifle. The stock was cracked, a spiderweb of fractures running through the composite material. Worse, the scope mount had taken a direct hit. One of the rings was bent, the Picatinny rail it was attached to visibly warped. The optic itself, a piece of equipment worth more than Miller's car, might be compromised. The Zero was gone. The rifle was, for all intents and purposes, broken. She looked up, not at Rostova or Miller, but at the mangled components of her primary tool. Her face showed no anger, no frustration. Only a deep, quiet focus, as if she were diagnosing a complex problem. Go on, get out of here, Rostova snapped, her patience gone. You're a distraction my shooters don't need. Sharma said nothing. She carefully closed the latches on the broken case, stood up, and lifted it. She gave a single, brief nod to Master Sergeant Vance, a silent acknowledgement of his presence, and then walked away from the firing line. She didn't head for the armorer or the motor pool. She walked toward the small, solitary workshop attached to the range's primary sensor tower, her stride even and unhurried. As she walked, the first flakes of snow began to fall, melting against the dark gravel at her feet. Vance watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the coming storm, that Captain Rostova had just made a very, very serious mistake. Inside the workshop, the world shrank to the space illuminated by a single overhead fluorescent bulb. The light hummed, casting a sterile, bluish glow over the steel workbench. Sharma laid out her tools with the precision of a surgeon. A torque wrench, a set of specialized files, a micrometer, a borescope, and a small, hardened steel block. She didn't rush. The storm could rage. The company could flounder. Rostova could scream herself hoarse. In here, there was only the problem and its solution. She stripped the rifle down to its core components. The action, the barrel, the trigger group. Each piece was wiped clean, inspected under a magnifying lamp, and set aside. Her hands moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. There were no wasted gestures, no hesitation. This was a ritual, a language she spoke not with her voice, but with her hands. She spent nearly an hour on the damaged scope rail alone. Using a set of calipers and a straight edge, she measured the deviation. It was less than a millimeter, but at 1,000 meters, that millimeter would translate to a miss of several feet. Unacceptable. She couldn't replace the rail here, but she could true it. She took a fine, diamond dust file and began to work, her strokes slow and steady. The sound was a soft, rhythmic shhhk, shhhk, shhhk against the rising howl of the wind outside. It was a sound of patience, of meticulous correction. While she worked, the world outside descended into chaos. The snow was no longer falling in gentle flakes. It was a horizontal wall of white, driven by gale-force winds. Visibility dropped to near zero. The temperature plummeted. Rostova, finally recognizing the danger, had ordered everyone into the main briefing building, but her commands were laced with panic. The calm, authoritative facade had cracked, revealing a core of frantic uncertainty. "Get a head count. Now!" she shouted over the roar of the storm. "Where is Vance?" The first sergeant appeared at her elbow, his face grim, snow clinging to his eyebrows. "Ma'am, Recon 1 is still out. Miller sent them to scout that northern ridge an hour ago." Rostova's face went white. "The ridge? I told him to wait for my go-ahead." "He wanted to impress you, Captain," Vance said, his voice flat. "He took initiative. They checked in 20 minutes ago. Said the storm was closing in and they were heading back. We've had nothing since. Their comms are dead." Panic rippled through the room. The northern ridge was treacherous even in good weather. In a whiteout blizzard, it was a death trap. Rostova grabbed a radio handset, her hand trembling slightly. "All call signs, this is Vulture Actual. I want a rescue team ready to move in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Negative, Captain." Vance's voice cut through her order, hard as iron. "You send a team out in this, we'll lose them too. We can't see 5 feet. Standard procedure is to shelter in place and wait for a break." "We can't just leave them out there to freeze," a young soldier cried out. "First Sergeant is right," Miller added, his earlier arrogance replaced by a nauseating fear. He was the one who had sent them. We have to wait." Rostova looked from Vance's stony face to Miller's terrified one. Her authority was evaporating. She was a captain of a ship sinking in a storm of her own making, and her crew was beginning to realize she didn't know how to swim. The command net was a cacophony of static and broken, unintelligible calls from other parts of the base. They were cut off. They were blind. It was into this moment of paralysis that Sharma walked. She moved from the howling darkness of the storm into the frantic, fluorescent-lit room, and the chaos seemed to part around her. She was wearing a clean field jacket, her expression as calm as the eye of the hurricane she had just walked through. In her hands, she carried the rifle. The stock was wrapped in high-strength resin and black tape, a field expedient but solid repair. The optic was seated on a newly trued rail, the bent ring replaced with a spare she carried in her kit. She ignored the stunned faces, the panicked officers, the frightened soldiers. Her gaze went straight to the darkened corner of the room dominated by the long-range tactical surveillance system, a complex array of screens, processors, and controllers that was tied into the base's most powerful thermal and optical sensors. It was a new system, barely installed, and none of Rostova's people were fully trained on it. It sat dormant, a monument to technology nobody knew how to use. Sharma walked to the console. "I need primary power," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of necessity. Rostova stared at her. "Sergeant, what in God's name do you think you're doing? I gave you an order to." "The armorer doesn't have the tools to fix this," Sharma said, patting the rifle stock without looking at the captain. "And the motor pool is busy chaining up the trucks. Your recon team is lost. They have approximately 90 minutes before advanced hypothermia renders them incapacitated. We can either talk about it, or you can get me power." Vance was already moving. "Do it," he said to the comms tech cowering by the power panel. The tech, startled into action by the first sergeant's authority, flipped a series of heavy breakers. The console hummed to life, screens flickering from black to blue, displaying a cascade of diagnostic data. Sharma's fingers flew across the keyboard. She bypassed the standard user interface, pulling up a command line prompt. Code scrolled up the screen, a language nobody else in the room understood. She was interfacing directly with the system's core programming. "I need a topographical overlay of the Northern Ridge, Sector 4, she said to the air, "and link me to the J-Star satellite feed. I need the latest thermal pass." "That feed is restricted," the comms tech stammered. "It requires 06 level clearance or higher." "Just give her the terminal," Vance growled. Sharma moved to the secure terminal, a separate keyboard and screen requiring a CAC card and PIN. She slid her card into the reader. The screen prompted for her credentials. She typed, her fingers a blur. Her profile page loaded, mandated by security protocols before access was granted. And there it was under the harsh fluorescent lights, for all to see. Rank, Sergeant First Class, SFC. Name, Sharma, Anya. Unit, U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit, AMU. Advanced Training Division. Billet. Lead Instructor / Weapons and Systems Integration Specialist. Callsign Nix. Lieutenant Miller, who had crept closer, read the screen. His breath hitched. Captain Rostova read it over his shoulder. The color drained from her face. Vance simply nodded to himself, his earlier suspicion confirmed. The name Nix wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend, a ghost story whispered about in sniper schools and special forces selection courses. Nix was the instructor who designed the impossible training scenarios, the one who could make a cold-bore shot at 2,000 meters in a crosswind. Nix was the expert who consulted on the development of systems like the very one Sharma was now commanding. They said Nix wrote the book on high-angle, high-altitude marksmanship. They had dismissed a living legend as a logistics clerk. They had broken her rifle. Rostova felt a wave of nausea. The visiting colonel wasn't just looking at her company's qualification metrics. He was here because Vulture Company had been selected as the testbed for a new training doctrine. A doctrine likely written by the very woman she had just called useless. Sharma was here to evaluate her. Sharma, however, seemed utterly oblivious to the revelation that had stunned the room into silence. She was already back at the main console, the restricted satellite data now feeding onto one of her screens. A ghostly, thermographic map of the mountains appeared, the image flickering through the storm's interference. "The wind is creating thermal ghosts," she murmured, her eyes scanning the screen. Too much clutter, her fingers danced across the controls, adjusting filters, tweaking algorithms, isolating for sustained heat signatures, core body temperature range, group of 3-inch. The screen resolved. 3 faint, man-shaped blurs appeared, huddled together on the leeward side of a large rock formation. They were almost invisible, their heat signatures nearly scrubbed away by the wind. "Found them," Sharma said with no inflection. "Grid 34S, FG, 881-994. They're pinned down, not moving. One of them may be injured." A wave of relief washed over the room, but it was short-lived. "We still can't get to them," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. "A rescue team would walk right past them in this blizzard." "We're not sending a rescue team," Sharma said. She turned to Vance. "First Sergeant, the range has a series of 50 emergency guidance beacons, correct?"
Solar power. La reactivat.
Vance nodded slowly. "They're part of the new system. The contractors said it was a proof of concept. Said it was damn near impossible to use in adverse conditions." "Adverse conditions are the only time you'd need it," Sharma countered. She pointed to a schematic on another screen. It showed the entire training area, dotted with 50 small circles, each a beacon. The activators are 3-centimeter thermal plates. You hit one with a targeted laser designator, and it lights up. You hit them in sequence, you can create a path. The range's laser designator is a vehicle-mounted unit, the comms tech said. Nothing can move out there. Sharma finally looked away from the screens. She looked down at the rifle in her hands. "My scope has a compatible laser. It's low power, meant for range finding. But if I can get a direct, solid hit on the thermal plate, it should have enough energy to trigger the activator." A heavy silence descended. They all understood what she was proposing, to hit a 3-centimeter target from her current position, over distances ranging from 800 to 1,500 meters, through a raging blizzard that distorted light and air. And not just once, 50 times. It wasn't marksmanship. It was magic. It was impossible. "No one can make those shots," Rostova said, her voice hollow. Sharma didn't answer. She was already moving. She dragged a heavy steel firing table to the workshop's large, reinforced window, which looked out over the range. She unbolted the storm shutters, letting the full fury of the blizzard press against the thick plexiglass. With Vance's help, she mounted her rifle onto a heavy tripod, locking it down until it was perfectly immobile. She plugged a cable from her scope into the surveillance console. Her view through the optic now appeared on the main screen for everyone to see. The image was a swirling vortex of white and gray. The wind howled, vibrating through the building's very foundation. Sharma settled in behind the rifle, her body becoming part of the machine. Her breathing slowed, each exhale a small cloud in the cold air. "First Sergeant, call out the beacon numbers in sequence, starting with the one closest to the team's position," she said, her voice calm and clear in her comms headset. "Tech, give me wind speed and direction at the target grid for each beacon." "Beacon 49er is closest to them," Vance's voice crackled in her ear. "Range, 1,488 meters. Wind at target is bearing 290 at 40 knots, gusting to 50. The tech reported, his voice shaky with awe. On the main screen, they all saw the view through her scope, a maelstrom of snow. Sharma made a minute adjustment to the scope's dials. A small red dot appeared in the center of the screen, a targeting reticle from the integrated system. She was no longer looking with her eyes. She was seeing through the station's thermal sensors, piped directly into her optic. The system cut through the snow, revealing a faint, ghostly landscape. She was aiming at something they couldn't even see. "Hold for wind," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. They watched the wind speed indicator on the screen fluctuate wildly. 50, 45, 48. Her body was unnaturally still. She wasn't fighting the rifle. She was part of it. The stock was pressed into her shoulder, her cheek welded to the repaired stock. Then, for a fraction of a second, the wind speed dropped to a steady 42 knots. In that instant, her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle didn't roar. It cracked, a single, sharp whip of sound that was instantly swallowed by the storm. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a controlled, violent push. On the screen, they saw the reticle jump and then resettle. For a long second, nothing happened. Miller started to open his mouth, to say it was impossible. Then, on the main thermal display of the mountain, a tiny point of light bloomed in the darkness, a single brilliant star in the white hell of the storm. It was Beacon 49, a direct hit. A collective gasp went through the room. "Hit," Sharma said, her voice devoid of emotion. She was already working the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, and chambering a new round. "Next beacon, First Sergeant." "Beacon 48, Vance said, his voice tight with disbelief. "Range, 1,450 meters. The process repeated. The calm diagnosis of wind and distance, the infinitesimal pause, the sharp crack of the rifle. And then, another point of light flared to life on the mountain, a few hundred meters from the first. One by one, she began to connect the dots. Beacon 47. Hit. Beacon 46. Hit. Each shot was a monumental feat of physics, calculation, and pure, instinctual skill. She was holding for windage, elevation, spin drift, and the Coriolis effect, all while the world dissolved into a blizzard around her. The barrel of the rifle grew hot, sending shimmering waves of heat into the air that she had to account for. The room became a chapel of concentration. The only sounds were Vance's voice calling out beacon numbers, the tech reporting wind data, the sharp report of the rifle, and the howling of the storm. Rostova stood frozen, her face a mask of shame and awe. She was witnessing a level of competence so far beyond her own that it felt like a physical blow. This was not the loud, brittle authority she projected. This was quiet, absolute mastery. This was true leadership, forged not in a classroom but in a crucible of impossible standards. With each new light that appeared on the mountain, a path was being drawn, a lifeline. On the thermal screen, they saw the three stranded soldiers begin to move. They stumbled from their shelter, drawn to the impossible chain of lights that had appeared in the blizzard. Sharma was a machine. Her focus was absolute. 20 shots. 30. 40. The barrel was smoking now. Each ejected casing was a small, brass prayer. She didn't celebrate the hits or curse the difficulty. She simply executed her task, one shot at a time. The field-repaired stock held firm. The retrued scope rail did not shift. The tools she had been entrusted with, tools others had broken and dismissed, were now, in her hands, performing miracles. Beacon 01, Vance called out, his voice hoarse. The last one, at the edge of the base perimeter. Range, 810 meters. Sharma took a final, steadying breath. The wind was at its worst now, a physical force shaking the building. She made her final calculation, held, and fired. The final crack echoed in the room. And on the mountain, the 50th light blinked on, completing a glowing, perfect line that stretched from the stranded team's position all the way back to the safety of the base. The path was lit. For the first time, Sharma pulled her eye away from the scope. She blinked slowly, her slate-gray eyes readjusting to the light of the room. A faint tremor ran through her hands, the only sign of the immense strain she had been under. Without a word, she stood up from the rifle, her movements stiff. The room was silent for a moment longer, and then it broke. Not with a cheer, but with the hushed, reverent sound of work resuming. The comms tech got on the radio, guiding the recon team along the lit path. Vance organized a medical team to meet them at the gate. The crisis was over. The spell was broken. An hour later, the 3 soldiers of Recon 1 stumbled into the briefing room, half frozen and exhausted, but alive. They were met with blankets and hot coffee, their eyes wide with the story of their rescue, of a line of lights appearing out of nowhere in the heart of the storm. As dawn broke, the storm finally exhausted itself. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the mountains blanketed in a pristine layer of fresh snow. The world was quiet again. Sharma was back in the small workshop, the M110A1 broken down on her workbench. She was cleaning it, her movements just as precise and methodical as they had been when she was repairing it. The smell of carbon solvent hung in the air. The door opened. Captain Rostova stood there, silhouetted against the morning light. She looked smaller, diminished. The arrogant certainty was gone, replaced by a deep, weary humility. She stepped inside, her boots silent on the concrete floor. She watched Sharma work for a full minute before speaking. "Sergeant," she began, her voice quiet, uncertain. "SFC Sharma. There's no excuse for my conduct, or for what happened to your equipment. I was unprofessional. I was wrong." Sharma didn't stop her work. She continued to run a clean patch through the rifle's barrel, her focus entirely on the task. Rostova faltered, searching for the right words. "What you did last night, I've never seen anything like it. You saved 3 of my soldiers. I owe you their lives. The company owes you." Sharma paused. She looked up from the rifle, her slate-gray eyes meeting Rostova's. There was no anger in her gaze. No triumph. There was nothing at all, just a calm, professional assessment. "Their training was inadequate," Sharma said, her voice even. "Your range procedures are flawed. Your risk assessment is based on metrics, not reality. That is what put them in danger." The words were not an accusation. They were a diagnosis, delivered with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. Each one landed on Rostova with the weight of undeniable truth. "Focus on that," Sharma continued, her attention returning to the bolt carrier group she was cleaning. "The colonel will want a full after-action report. Have it on his desk by 0800-inch. It was a dismissal, clean and absolute. It wasn't about forgiveness or retribution. It was about the mission, the work, the standards." Rostova stood there for another moment, a captain with no orders to give. She finally nodded, a barely perceptible motion, and turned and left the workshop, closing the door softly behind her. Sharma finished her cleaning. She reassembled the rifle, the pieces clicking together with familiar, satisfying precision. She placed it carefully back in its damaged case. She latched it, stood, and picked it up. Outside, Master Sergeant Vance was waiting. He watched her emerge into the cold, bright morning. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He simply fell into step beside her as she walked toward the base's small, transient barracks. "That was good work, Sergeant," Vance said, looking at the snow-covered mountains. "It was the only option," Sharma replied. They walked in silence, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. The 50 beacons on the mountain, their job done, had gone dark, leaving the range quiet and empty once more, waiting for the next set of shooters to test their skill against its unforgiving standards. Anya Sharma had a report to write. The work was not yet done.